I think it's fair to say I'm passionate in helping people to understand that God is creative and created the world, irrespective of what you think about Genesis 1 and 2. And so it's in his nature to be creative, and we are made in his image, so therefore we are also creative. And when we do something creative, we're experiencing something divine. We're sharing in the nature of our divine creator. And that's why I think people have a need to create. I mean, artists will talk about having it's something they just have to do because it's part of their nature. And I think actually that's true for all of us, just that we often suppress it because we do jobs that aren't very creative perhaps, or we don't have space in our lives to be creative, or we just lose the ability to be imaginative that all children have. So part of our work at Beyond is trying to find ways to encourage people to reignite their imagination if it's not on fire already. And in doing that, we are convinced that they will also experience something of the divine nature of God, but particularly if we're able to just give them a nudge in that direction and say, did you realize that, when you play around with light, you're experiencing something of the creator of light. I think art can be evangelistic in the sense that sometimes clearly people put together art because they have a particular message that they want to put forward about God. But actually it's best when there isn't a message hidden within that. I used to be an actor, and or began my working life as an actor, and we always knew that political drama, the kind of plays that are put together because they've got a particular political point to put across, or in the Christian world, drama that's put together to put across a particular point about Christianity, is never going to be as effective as just telling the straightforward story. And that's what we see Jesus doing. Jesus told parables, but didn't give people the explanation of them. Didn't say, the reason I've told you this parable is because you need to not be so rich, or whatever it is we want to talk about. He left people to draw their own conclusions. Early on in the life of Beyond, someone sent me a paper they'd written about mission and evangelism in the 21st century. And it was obviously from a good evangelical, because it was 3 points that were all began with P. And the first was that proclamation was the old-fashioned way of doing evangelism. It's the Billy Graham, have a big crusade, preach from the front, tell people what they should do. That's kind of largely gone out of the window now in the postmodern world. The second one was pastoral, which is, I guess you would say, the Alpha Course movement is the best example of that. Invite people around for dinner, get alongside them, get to know people, and tell them about Jesus as you go along. The third was that they discovered through doing some art themselves, and which I think we keep in mind all the time at Beyond, is parable, which is I see every piece of art we do, every art event that we run as a parable, a little story that we put out there, and then let people interpret that in whatever way they want to. And if they find God in that, that's brilliant. If they don't, then that may be because we've not done our job very well, or it may just be that God's doing a different thing with them. In our local park, there's an art installation which is a labyrinth and a fingerprint, and we've run an event on there about identity because it is a fingerprint. So we've asked people, rather than just do the prayer labyrinth in the way that I'm sure many people are familiar with, you walk the path until you reach the middle, and it's about coming inside yourself and then coming back out into the world as you walk back out again. But as part of that, we asked people to consider and tell stories to themselves about their own identity, about what roles they play in life, who they describe themselves as to other people, and how they thought God viewed them as a person, so that the event becomes a story about my own identity with God, rather than just a prayer walk. We're very interested in working with anybody and everybody who wants to work with us, and also I think we learned very early on to accept all responses. Sometimes responses that we weren't particularly comfortable about. In the early days of one of the beach huts, we got involved with a theatre company who wanted to take on one of the beach huts, and they brought some amazing artworks, which I then was able to use in other things as well. But they also put together a little play, which was all about the spirits of the beach and the wind and the waves and the sea, and wasn't a traditional Christian view of the way that we see the spirit at work, but it was a really interesting perspective to listen to. We've also done some work with an artist called Chris Levine, who's a light artist and has spent his life working with lasers, and he's a very spiritual person. He spends up to 2 hours a day meditating and uses laser light to help him with his meditation practice, because it's pure light. Laser light doesn't appear in nature. It's not a natural light. It's one single wavelength of light, which helps him to focus on purity and those sorts of things. And so that's something that I've learned from him, about the importance of focusing in on one particular thing. Lots of people say they're not creative, and I just tell them it's not true. that we're all made to be creative. We simply have lost the desire to, or we've got our inhibitions stop us from it. I ask people to try and remember what they were like as a child, and did they ever have an imaginary friend? Did they ever make a den? Did they ever play games with their friends where they were pirates or cowboys and Indians or something like that? And just to say, look, that's you exercising your imagination. All we're trying to look at is helping you to recapture something of that. And it really helps actually to have children in the room as well at the same time. We run sometimes we run a light event, and we found that if there are children, at some point we have a section in the event where we just ask people to experience light installations, and it always goes much better if there are children there as well, because they straight away want to play with the lasers and get as close as they can to the big floodlight, or to just sit and gaze at the mirror ball that's going, or and so actually asking adults who are feeling inhibited to accompany children in this is a really good way of getting them to rediscover their creativity. My top tip would always be to try to create opportunities for epiphany, to keep that in mind, that we're trying to create an environment where God can do his thing rather than us do our thing, and that when we're involved in an artistic endeavor particularly, there's an opportunity for God to break in ways which we can't predict and which we might not know about. I think second, I would say find ways to help people free up their imaginations. So simple, actually sometimes just beginning a session with a simple mind map exercise, and just help people kind of realize how far away from an original idea you can get. To help people be creative, I sometimes ask them to imagine they are wearing different colour hats. It's a scheme developed by someone that I've used sometimes. So if you're wearing a blue hat, you're about collecting data and finding out what the situation is. If you're wearing a green hat, that's about fresh ideas. And the most important one, especially in church, I find, is to tell people not to wear a black hat, because the black hat is what the judge wears. And that's the one that says, no, we can't do that. We haven't got any budget, or we haven't got enough people, or we tried it before and it never worked. So in any conversation about something creative, always be aware that there shouldn't be any black hats in the room.